Hi, folks. With Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of so-called stolen land. What is stolen land? How do we define stolen land? What was seen as stolen land, hundreds of years ago? How is it seen today? How would it have been seen thousands of years ago? And so on. So I'd like to sort of go through that and try and arrive at some, if it's even possible, some sort of definition of what might be stolen land. Now, all across the Western world, the white Western world, there's groups of people, right, particularly in say, where there's been colonial activities, say in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and some of the islands around the Caribbean and so on. There are these big movements aggressively and lavishly funded by globalist NGOs and Jewish groups, George Soros, the World Economic Forum, but all this stolen land stuff is only directed against white people. Recently, the Jews, like the Israelis in the Levant, it's come up there, but that's only quite recent. The stolen land gig for the Jews has only been around, I doubt, a couple of years at most, maybe a bit longer, but not very long. Whereas the Christian, straight white male Christian Anglo-Saxon societies, they're getting it's been stuck right up them about this stolen land thing. No one's illegal on stolen land. No, everyone's a human being, and so on and so forth. So let's have a look at this now. I'll use Australia as the first example, and we'll cover others in a minute. But the entire population of Australia was less than 1 million. Some estimates range. There was 200,000 at the lower end, and 1 million Indigenous Aborigines who were in the entire continent. And it's a big continent, the entire continent of Australia. So there were fewer Aborigines in Australia than even a small-sized city today. So you look at some of the smaller regional cities, 350,000. There's more people living in those regional cities today than there were in the whole of Australia. So the population was very small, and it was nomadic. So they didn't own land, they didn't develop land, they didn't build cities or cultivate vast fields, run herds of cattle, or those sorts of things. They just didn't do that. They were hunter-gatherers, Stone Age hunter-gatherers, living off the land. That's all they did. And they moved around, around not only the seasons, but went on what's known generally as walkabout. And they could travel, well, in the more, the parched, the interior, like in the parched areas of the land, they could travel quite long distances to find better hunting grounds, or eating kangaroo and gathering, I don't know, berries and grubs and so on. Again, we're talking Stone Age hunter gatherer here. So they don't have the technology and the wherewithal. They've got no written language. They haven't invented the wheel. So it's a real early Stone Age people. Now, they didn't own land. They had no concept of land ownership. They didn't perceive it. It wasn't something that they could have. They didn't develop or improve the land or build houses, things like that. And that's where land ownership becomes an issue. Once you start improving the land, it could be you're building, I don't know, a house or a farm or a storage barn or something, fencing it in to keep your domesticated animals in there. All of these sorts of things, then that's when land ownership becomes an issue. So it's a society that's reasonably advanced relative to early Stone Age, at least, that starts to perceive ownership of land as an issue. Now, the Aborigines perceived the resources of the land, and this is again the basic resources, and so it was the fish in the sea, or the the kangaroos in the area, or the what's called a witchetty grub. It's a grub that the Aborigines ate, and and so on. The wild animals that they could catch and eat, including snakes and whatever else. So the Aborigines didn't own land. They had not even a concept of it. So the idea you can steal land from people that don't own it, that's a stretch. Now you could argue about the resources on the land, for example, the kangaroos or something. You could make that argument, but the kangaroos weren't fixed in place. They could move around. They could move to another area or another place. And there were kangaroos elsewhere. So it's not as if you're depriving someone of their house and now they haven't got a house. There were kangaroos all over, and many of them, by the way, millions, tens of millions of kangaroos all over Australia. And so if the Aborigines couldn't have kangaroos, in place one, then there would be kangaroos in place two. So they weren't being deprived of the resources. They could still access the resources on the land, in this case, the food or the berries down the road. Now, there could be, say, an area where it was rich in berries, for example, rich in berries, and the white man acquired that land, and therefore the Aborigines thought, hey, hold on a minute, what about these berries? You could get that sort of conflict could occur. But the Aborigines had no concept of land ownership. And again, given they didn't improve the land or build houses or build structures, and were nomadic anyway, and were always moving around anyway, then land ownership, again, wasn't on their radar. Now, what happened when the Europeans arrived, Europeans came with the idea of land ownership and advanced technologically, were advanced 10,000 years of technological advancement beyond what the Aborigines were, and land ownership, because we're going to improve the land, we're going to build houses, we're going to build farms, we're going to have livestock, we're going to build irrigation, we're going to do all sorts of things. So if we're going to put that amount of time and effort into improving the land, then we need land ownership, which is an obvious extension of A. B has to follow A in this case. And therefore they would quite legitimately attempt to acquire the land for the Aborigines. Now, bear in mind that the white man came along with technology that the Aborigines could barely dream of, let alone conceive and get their head around. Things like iron tools, metal tools, things like that. And the Aborigines didn't develop those sort of tools. They would just use a sharp stone to cut things, that type of stuff. And so, when they saw knives and axes and, those types of things that the white man brought with them, they always said, well, we'll give you 10 axes, 10 knives and, this or that, but we want this land here. And so they would do. Now, the Aborigines saw it differently, again, because they couldn't understand or conceive land ownership or property ownership. They just beyond their comprehension. But again, the white man said, well, we're going to improve this land, farms, houses, irrigation, this, that, and the next thing, roads, and so on. So now the Aborigines were told, well, you're welcome to use the road if you want. And, we're building a dam here for water. You're welcome to have water if you want. So those sorts of things were there. It wasn't if these resources that the white man were developing with white man technology were denied to the Aborigines. Far from it, they could use it. But the Aborigines would go on, because they're nomadic, they go away on their nomadic, excursions, and they'd come back a few years later. And maybe the people that had made the deal, this area of land in exchange for the metal axes and knives and so on, maybe they were dead, maybe they were gone, maybe they were off with another tribe, maybe they were not part of the group that came back. But the group would come back and say, no, we want this land back now. You guys can fuck off. The white man would say, well, hold on, we bought this land fair and square, hey, it's ours now. And by the way, look at all the improvements to the land we've engaged in. And the Aborigines coming, don't give a shit. That if you did pay us anything, it was just for a short-term rental. rental so you can get the fuck off. And if you don't, by the way, I'm going to stick you with my spear. So the white man would say, well, you touch me with that spear, I'm going to shoot you. And on it would go. So you can see how the basis for conflict was there. Now, on top of this, the white man's diseases like, I don't know, smallpox and plague and fucking diphtheria and all these sorts of things, that the Aborigines were catching those diseases and they were dying, no question, smallpox. And but that would have happened no matter what. When you get people that were that insulated from the rest of the world would suddenly come in contact with the rest of the world. Similarly, only the white man had that sort of technology to cover, those ocean-going voyages for that time and those distances. These were voyages that could last, 3 or 4 months. And so when the white man arrived, you're looking at a 10,000 year technological and developmental gap between one group of people and the other. 10,000 fucking years. What do you think's going to happen? I mean, really? Now the white man's view of resources was that you're entitled to take resources that were not being used. If those resources were not being used, you're entitled to take it. Now, it's different if the white man came along and those resources, now the resources could be land, it could be, I don't know, metal ores, iron ore or something, coal or whatever. If those resources were being used, then it was a different approach. But when the resources were not being used and where the concept of those resources, I mean, there was no technology that the Aborigines, or for that matter, the black, sub-Saharan Africans had, and others had, where they could understand smelting of metal or something. Again, thousands of years separating the technology of one civilization and another. So land ownership was not an issue, nor was it an issue for the Caribbean islanders, the Indians and the Caribbean. It was to some extent an issue for some of the South American civilizations, the Maya and the Incas. But again, they saw land ownership not in the sense of we own the land to develop it and that sort of, although they did do that, by the way. And I'll come back to them in a minute. The North American Indians again didn't sell the Canadians, didn't see the didn't have a concept of land ownership that was recognizable at all in land ownership concepts today. So when the activists say stolen land, they use the current interpretation definition of improved land and say, well, that's it. This land, the improved land, but they weren't improving the land. They weren't digging the irrigation ditches and building the houses and having the farms. There were some, and they were seasonal and nomadic as well. Now, there was some minor agriculture for quick grow crops, things like squash, for example. You can find evidence of that. But again, land ownership wasn't something I even conceived. So to say today that land ownership, as in stolen land, was an issue, it's not stolen land. It never was. And now, even if it was, even if you want to call it stolen land, remember they're not going around to China and saying, "You Han Chinese, you stole the land from all those other groups around you, you evil Han Chinese, racist, colonial, Nazi fascists, and we're going to parade in the street and wave placards." They're not doing that in China. They're not masses of people going into Tibet saying the Chinese have colonized Tibet. You're not seeing any of that. You're not, you're not seeing how the Muslims, coming out. This is after the Prophet Muhammad was doing the rounds. That were going and invading all these other places, like in North Africa and around the wider Arabian area and into Afghanistan or northern India and what today is Pakistan and Bangladesh. You're not seeing the white schoolgirly college kid lesbians running around placards complaining. But the only people that are being held to account for this are falsely held to account. The white people, the white Anglo, only them. And so you can see how disingenuous it is. And you also see how active the globalists are in funding this thing, in trying to undermine and subvert Western society, its accomplishments and its self-confidence and so on. They're getting away with it too, by the way. They've managed to capture pretty much all the Western governments. They're not only going along with it, but assisting it and facilitating it, even with taxpayer dollars, for goodness sakes. So I did want to make this point, though, that land ownership and the ownership of resources. For example, some of the earlier explorers in Australia could travel for weeks across Australia and not see a single Aborigine. Vast areas of prime agricultural land just left vacant. It wasn't being used. And the rationale at the time, which is not an unreasonable one, is, well, these people aren't using this land. We should use it for growing, wheat or corn or something or other, or running cattle and agriculture, farming generally. We should do that because they're not using it. So to now say today, you stole that land, no, it wasn't being used. The same could be said for extracting metals, iron ore, coal, whatever, from the ground. The Africans and the Australian Aborigines, and they had not even the slightest concept of that. So to them, it was nothing. And the idea that the white man could turn that stuff in the ground into a metal axe or an iron shovel or a knife or something like that. Wow, that's magic. So that was again the chasm, the difference in technological advancement. So this whole thing is a furphy. This idea of stolen land, it's bullshit. There's probably only probably one of the more advanced Stone Age civilizations was the Maori in New Zealand, where they maybe have a bit of a case for the stolen land. Not a strong one, I would argue, but nonetheless, they had far more permanent type settlements, things like that. Some advanced, in Stone Age terms, some advanced technologies in weaving and so on. So they were more advanced. But in terms of the North American Indians, I think the Aztecs and the Maya, they also had a bit of I think they could argue quite reasonably that they were building cities, Machu Picchu, the list goes on. And so they were improving, and that there was a land ownership thing there. But they were in a permanent state of subjugation and civil war, which made it easy for them to be conquered. Now, being conquered, if you look at, say, when the Romans conquered Britain, the Celtic tribes there, they were so busy bickering amongst themselves that they made it easy for the Romans to get in there and set up shop. But when the Romans left, the bickering started, and then the local tribes, so the heads of the local tribes then looked around for mercenaries. So we'll look, those guys down the road, they're getting heavy. So what we'll do is we'll show those bums. We'll go and get some mercenaries from along the Rhine River in Germany and southern Denmark and all this sort of what today is southern Denmark. So they're hiring these mercenary gangs, and then the mercenaries would demand gold and shitloads of it. And the local chief can say, well, look, I can't afford to pay you. Why don't I just give you some land? Yeah, you can have all that land over there. So they go, oh, yeah? Okay, so they moved in and set up shop and effectively took over. And the Celts that didn't intermarry and intermingle with the Angles and the Jutes and all that sort of thing, which many did, were then pushed to the extremities in the British Isles, in places like Wales and Cornwall and Western Devon and that sort of thing. So this created Scotland. This created this was a tantamount to invasion. They call it invasion. It's probably a bit of a stretch, but because they were invited in. But it nonetheless meant. So you could say, well, England is all stolen land. Britain is all stolen land. You could make the same argument. But again, the argument of stolen land is only used against white people, only against white, not against the Chinese, not against the Bantus in Africa, not against the Arabs, only white people, which just demonstrates, in my view at least, how totally fucking disingenuous it is and how aggressively it's being funded by the globalists. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.